Some news outlets have claimed there's a troubling pipeline from libertarianism to the most revolting corners of the alt-right movement.
Jews will not replace us!
Their evidence is that white supremacist Christopher Cantwell, the star of a Vice documentary about the racist, tiki torch-wielding Charlottesville mob, was once a figure in the Libertarian Free State Project. And the alt-right icon and white nationalist Richard Spencer himself was once a Ron Paul supporter and self-identified as a libertarian. Anyone who claims to care about individual liberty should reject the overt racism in Charlottesville, the broadly defined alt-right, and the watered-down Alt-Lite variants represented by provocateurs like Milo Yiannopoulos and YouTube personalities Stefan Molyneux and Laura Southern, as well as the right-wing nationalism pushed by recently fired White House strategist Steve Bannon. These expressions of right-wing populism are the antithesis of libertarianism, and they collapse under their own logic.
I think it's more accurate to say that the alt-right cares about Western supremacy rather than white supremacy.
Western civilization is our birthright. It makes all good things possible. Undefended, it collapses.
The fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive.
The alt-right claims to be the savior of Western civilization, which apparently is on the brink of collapse because Muslims and Mexicans are invading our society.
They come to countries, they rape women. They're having a very difficult time learning not to rape women.
Once you replace one population with another, it will not be the same. Not even close.
You know, when you bring the third world to the first world, you don't get the first world. You get the third world.
Members of the alt-right point to the sizable influx of immigrants to Europe in the wake of destabilizing Middle Eastern wars. But America isn't Europe, which is one problem with this framing of the West as some sort of monolith. Here's a straightforward look at immigrants as a percentage of the US population. Sure, there's an upswing since around the end of the Vietnam War, but really it's a return to the historical average. And what was going on here in the late 19th and early 20th centuries as immigrants flooded in? The Second Industrial Revolution. Cars, steel, electricity, telecommunication, and America's rise as a global economic superpower. Want to make America great again? Maybe free-flowing immigration combined with an open marketplace is the winning formula. But let's get back to those Western values. America's founders based their ideas on Enlightenment values such as individual property rights and free trade, as articulated by philosophers like John Locke and Adam Smith. And who did they build their ideas in opposition to? Mercantilists, protectionists, or what we today would call economic nationalists. Post-Charlottesville, Trump's recently fired chief strategist Steve Bannon told a reporter that white ethno-nationalists are losers and clowns. And then he made a case for economic nationalism.
Economic nationalism. We're a nation with an economy, not an economy just in some global marketplace with open borders.
We talk about free trade. It's not free trade, it's stupid trade. China dumps everything that they have over here. No tax, no nothing, no problems, no curfews, no anything. We can't get into China.
President Trump is right that free trade isn't always a two-way street. But as Nobel Prize-winning economist Milton Friedman explained,
any individual country by itself, on the average, tends to benefit from free trade regardless of what the other countries do.
Don't believe him? Well, recent polling finds the majority of economists agree that free trade is a net benefit. And empirical studies show a correlation between fewer trade barriers and a higher per capita GDP. One study compared countries that opened up trade and cut tariffs to ones that didn't, finding that citizens in the freer trade countries saw their incomes increase by an average of 20% more than in closed economies. Through international trade, middle-income consumers have seen their purchasing power grow by as much as 30%, and low-income consumers benefit roughly twice as much. Trump's fans can cheer when he pressures companies to locate their manufacturing plants in America, but these success stories unravel with closer scrutiny. Just like the progressive left, the alt-right wants to empower the federal government, just as long as the right people are in power, doling out benefits to their favorite constituencies. This is why you'll hear alt-right leaders speaking favorably of single-payer healthcare.
When we enter this new stage where we're talking about national programs, where we're talking about We have a basic income program. We have a healthcare program. It's almost inherently racial. It will inherently, you could say, nationalize the discourse or racialize the discourse.
Before he was ejected from the White House, Steve Bannon attempted to talk Trump into boosting income taxes to fund his nationalist agenda. Some right-wing populists have even advocated using the power of the state to force private tech companies to be run like quasi-governmental public utilities.
Since it has the power to censor the internet, Google should be regulated like the public utility it is, to make sure it doesn't further distort the free flow of information.
The alt-right may be in for the same sort of harsh lesson as the left about what happens when you opportunistically increase the power of a government you're certain to lose hold of one day. So why does a philosophy so at odds with its core values attract any defectors from the libertarian movement? Well, what's most appealing are the alt-right's opposition to foreign wars, its nominal defense of free speech, and a valid-sounding critique of PC excess. After all, Milo Yiannopoulos made a name for himself as a provocateur on campus.
Feminism is cancer. Thank you very much.
The truth is that the alt-right's commitment to free speech runs about an inch deep. Many have engaged in similar behaviors as the politically correct progressives they decry, forming online mobs and boycotts to encourage private entities to fire commentators like Kathy Griffin and Reza Aslan for political speech deemed offensive. And they've shut down modernized stagings of Shakespeare's Julius Caesar for the offense of depicting the assassination of a Trump-like lead character.
This is violent. Security, please.
They've cheered a sitting president's threats to sue publications that criticize him and his willingness to shut out journalists whose coverage he doesn't like. You can fight for free speech and oppose political correctness without subscribing to this flawed ideology. Libertarians have your back on that, as do many traditional conservatives, and some liberals like Jonathan Rauch, the Brookings Institution scholar, who literally wrote the book on the topic in 1995.
Being offended is part of how we learn. If you can't offend people, then you can't criticize people. And if you can't criticize people and ideas, then there is absolutely no way to figure out what ideas are good and what ideas are bad.
The alt-right's America First nationalism engenders a skepticism of foreign military intervention that's sorely lacking in Washington. And that's what's most compelling about the alt-right and the political realignment it's forced, with former conservative hawks like Ann Coulter calling out Trump for troop surges in the Middle East. But even this anti-interventionism is soft ground, because if you delve into the mind of a figure like Steve Bannon, you'll uncover a nightmare vision of a world already engaged in global warfare.
We are in an outright war against jihadist Islamic fascism. And this war is I think, metastasizing.
And the alt-right's focus on nationalism and racial and ethnic identity doesn't bode well for a more peaceful future. The alt-right ultimately amounts to a backwards-looking movement, and that's what's most concerning. It's telling that their beloved slogan, "Make America Great Again," both harkens back to a mythical time that never existed and was ripped off from Ronald Reagan. The alt-right is about recapturing a non-existent past through vague but misleading appeals to Western values. Libertarians are the true defenders of the Enlightenment and present a forward-looking vision that centers on the power of individuals to create their own experiences, make their own choices, and foster a more peaceful world. If that's not for you, stick with the alt-right or its spin-offs. Just know what you're signing up for.